Good evening. Welcome to Hasta Ocho, your half hour of local and regional news, features, weather, and other information. I'm Mike Clifford. Charles E. Charlie Cobb Jr. will be speaking this Thursday at 7 p.m. at Carson Auditorium in the Student Union Building on the Adams State campus in Alamosa. Mr. Cobb worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, as field secretary in the Mississippi Delta during the Freedom Summer of 1964. He's gone on to quite a long career in civil rights, journalism, education, and he is going to speak on the topic, Changing America from Martin Luther King to Mississippi. And prior to the lecture, Cobb will sign copies of his book, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. He'll be doing that starting at 6 p.m. So, again, he started off in 1962. He went to Mississippi and ended up working with civil rights, working on civil rights issues for quite a while. And he is going to be speaking on Thursday at Adams State. You're going to draw on your experience as working with SNCC in the Mississippi Delta during the Freedom Summer of 1964. Can you tell us a little bit about, what your experiences were then and how you got involved in it?
Well, firstly, I worked in Mississippi from 1962 until 1967. The Freedom Summer was only part of my experience working in Mississippi. And like most of the people in SNCC, and CORE, it was the sit-in movement that pulled us in. And it didn't matter whether you were Northern or Southern. If you were going to college in those days, 1960, when the sit-ins erupted, the chances were overwhelming that you were going to a historically black college or university. And if you were going to a historically black college or university, you were going to a Southern school, because that's where they were.
Right. And you were at Howard, right?
I was at Howard in Washington, D.C., which is actually my hometown. But everything around Washington was segregated. Washington had only begun to desegregate in 1953. So you were going to be confronted with segregation and confronted with the question, well, what are you going to do when denied service wherever, at a restaurant or a lunch counter or something like that. And I became involved in the sit-in movement with the group that was on Howard's campus, engaging in sit-ins in Virginia and Maryland. Because I was involved... Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Go ahead.
Because I was involved in the sit-ins at Howard, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, invited me to a workshop in Texas, and I took a bus headed for Texas, but I got off the bus in Mississippi, and then the work around voter registration was just beginning in Mississippi. So instead of continuing on to Texas, I became involved with SNCC and its work in Mississippi in the summer of 1962. And I was thinking then that I would just be doing that for the summer, but wound up staying there for almost 5 years.
Sometimes we don't go down the paths that we had planned to, huh?
No.
And
what happened was, what happened, one of the students, when I told them I met the students sitting in Mississippi. When I told one of them I was on the way to Texas for a workshop, this student, Lawrence Giat, who would become the head of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, challenged me. He said, "You're going to Texas for a workshop on civil rights. What's the point of doing that when you're standing in Mississippi right now?" And another student said, "Yeah, Charlie, you're in the war zone here." And they kind of pulled me. I tease the Mississippians these days because I stay in touch. I said, you people kidnapped me back in 1962.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure you learned as much there as you would have anywhere else, or probably more.
Exactly. That's for sure. For somebody coming from the north, essentially, to come into rural Mississippi, everything was a learning experience.
Well, so yeah, tell us a little about that. I mean, even going from Springfield to D.C., there must have been some changes, but especially down into the deep rural South, a lot of different things you had to deal with.
Yeah, not so much from Springfield to D.C. because that's where most of my family is. And I was born there. My mother was born there, and my grandmother came here as a young married woman. So there was nothing that was really unfamiliar in D.C. But Mississippi, I hadn't been up in the Delta more than, a day or two when I was walking down a dirt road with another colleague I'm working with when we get stopped by a white guy who orders us into his car with a pistol. And when my friend says, well, why do we have to get in this car? The guy says, because this pistol says so. And this guy turns out to be the mayor.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Who also broadcasts the agricultural news, is the head of the White Citizens Council, and we find out when we get down to City Hall where his office is, he's the Justice of the Peace.
Mm.
And
so
I'm wondering
huh? Well, yeah, I'm wondering what happened after that then.
Well, then he accuses us of being New York City communists, coming to Mississippi to stir up trouble. Well, the people I was with were Mississippians. I'm the only guy that's there. There were three of us who wasn't from Mississippi.
Well, and
so he yells and screams at us about being New York City communists, and we need to get out of town. He's threatening us, and then he just throws us out of the office. He says, "Get out of here." And kicks us out of the office. Because I think my friends, when I didn't know what was going to happen, but my friends thought he kicked us out instead of doing something worse, because he didn't want a lot of publicity about us being in the county, which would have occurred if something had happened to us.
So you stayed there and kept organizing, working?
Yeah, I stayed in that little town, Louisville, Mississippi. This is where Fannie Lou Hamer was from, and I was with her the first time she tried to register to vote. But I stayed in the Delta, which is the cotton country, and I worked in several spots in the Delta there, Washington County. It won't mean anything to your listeners, these places.
Well, you never know. There are probably a few folks who grew up in Mississippi or something.
Yeah, okay. Well, they're rural. If they know Mississippi, they'll know of the Delta, which is where the cotton was grown. And I worked with Delta counties, a number of them, over those years, essentially around voter registration. All of those counties up in the Delta where the cotton was grown were 60% or more black. Yet you when you looked around to see how many black people were registered to vote, and in, say, Belzoni, Humphreys County, only one black person in a county that was 70-some-odd% black was registered to vote. And a number of them, there was no black people registered to vote.
So were there, I've heard stories about, these incredibly difficult citizenship tests or...
Well, that happened after the Supreme Court decision in 1964. All the southern states, Mississippi and all of them, began to tighten the voter registration regulations. So in Mississippi, at the heart of it, you had to interpret any section of the Constitution that the circuit clerk picked out to the satisfaction of the circuit clerk. So he could pick out a one-sentence section. For instance, the shortest section in the Mississippi state constitution said, there shall be no imprisonment for debt. Or you could get a multi-paragraph, complicated section written full of legal language. And they use that to keep, they may or may not give a white person a literacy test at all, but they would in Mississippi. But a black person trying to register to vote would be given some of the longest sections of the Mississippi State Constitution to interpret to the satisfaction of the registrar or circuit clerk. And, of course, it was the registrar or circuit clerk who determined whether or not you had interpreted a section satisfactorily. So that meant even if you had a Ph.D., you could flunk the test. In Alabama, you just had to answer questions to the satisfaction of the registrar. So he would, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap?
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Questions like those. So, I mean, all those laws emerged after the 1954 Supreme Court decision on schools. And it was a deliberate attempt to keep blacks from registering their vote. And you can understand why in these majority black counties, if black people got registered to vote, they could dislodge a lot of these county authorities that had been in place, well, for years, decades.
Right. And so prior to 1964, was it basically, intimidation and violence that kept... Violence characterized the response by both official and unofficial authority and power to any effort at civil rights. And that violence included assassination and lynching and all that. What you do see a change in the nature of the violence after World War II, because before World War II, you get what a scholar friend of mine calls spectacle lynching. And anybody interested in civil rights has seen the photographs of men hanging from trees and that sort of thing. Well, and where you could actually advertise in a newspaper, we're going to lynch Charlie Cobb Thursday by the fork of the road. Y'all come, and you see their photographs. You see them of the men bringing their whole families down, holding their kids up so they can watch some poor guy get burned or shot or mutilated. That shifts after World War II, I think, because there were more than 1 million black people were soldiers in World War II, and what the Klan and other organizations like that found out was that people they intended to shoot were increasingly inclined to shoot back. So the violence becomes more covert. It becomes assassination. And that's what happened to Medgar Evers in 1963 or Martin Luther King in 1968. It becomes drive-bys, driving by and opening fire with rifles, or driving by and tossing dynamite on a civil rights activist's home or a church that was active with the movement. That's where you see the distinction. But violence characterized the response to civil rights almost till the end of the 60s. And, we were talking about registering people to vote, and, that was important work that was done in the early 60s for that. But where do you see that right now in the U.S.?
Well, I think there's still an issue around voting, and that really has to do with using the vote. I mean, you don't have the barriers today, despite the efforts of some state legislatures, I think, to restrict voter registration. You make it more difficult to register to vote. You really don't have anything like the barriers to voter registration today that you had, prior to the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But you do have a problem still today, it seems to me, with people using the vote. I mean, the turnout in these past midterm elections, here I'm talking about the black turnout, was like the white turnout, miserable.
Right.
You still see, with the exception of presidential elections, poor voter turnouts in many, many cities, towns, counties, and states. So that's a big issue. It's one of the things I talk to the Black Lives Matter people about. How do you organize for getting the vote out. If you don't like the policy, if you don't like police violence, then what you have to do is gain the power to change the police force.
Right.
And you do that with the vote, which means you have to organize to do that. So that's a big, big issue. You know, there's a broader kind of, I think, reluctance of authority, political authorities, to deal with any number of issues that still confront the country related to economics, poverty, and the like. And dealing with it, I think, centers on changing the politicians. And I don't mean electing Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll bet. Well, and so, you're kind of talking about using the vote as a tool to make changes in the system. But I don't know how that relates exactly to prior to your talk on Thursday night, starting at 6:00, you're going to be signing copies of your book, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. And
yeah.
I'm curious, I'm sure by design, that's a very thought-provoking title. So can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think that civil rights struggle, firstly, then and now, is about empowerment. And when you talk about that, there's going to be resistance. And what you had in the South was violent attacks that accompanied the growing success of the civil rights movement. Now, the tactic of the movement, as articulated by Martin Luther King in particular, was nonviolence as a tactic for struggle. But there were people in these communities, particularly in rural communities, who, while appreciating the impact of nonviolent struggle, said, we're not going to allow white people to kill you because they don't like what you're doing. And these people, who tended to be older people the ages of our parents and grandparents, all had weapons. Southern culture, guns are a big part of Southern culture, black or white. If you stayed with a family in the South, there was always guns in the household.
Sure.
Shotgun in the corner, or Winchester up hanging on the wall, a pistol in a desk, in a drawer, or something like that. And people used guns for self-defense. They really used guns mostly to go out hunting and put food on the table because the rural South is very poor. But they made up their minds that they would also use their weapons to protect civil rights workers. And really my book talks about that and that dynamic, making the point that, A, this was largely centered in the rural South, and that you really had to understand the attitude of World War II veterans who returned home. And 3, you had to understand Southern culture and the role of guns in Southern culture. Even Martin Luther King, when his home was blown up and bombed in 1956, went to the sheriff's office and applied for a permit to carry a concealed weapon because he was a product of Southern culture, and that was his first instinct. Now, later, he would embrace nonviolence fully as a way of life, but back in 1956, his attitude was typical.
Sure.
If I'm being assaulted, if my family is at risk, if my home is at risk, then I'm going to defend it by any means necessary. And that's what the book talks. It makes it, really, I'm saying that this is not rocket science. This is not difficult to understand. All you have to do is think of black people as human beings, and they're going to respond to violence and terrorism the way any human being would respond, and that is do the best they could and can to protect themselves. That's sort of where I'm coming from in this book, which is a history book. and it's saying that this is a piece of the history that's missing from the historiography, and a piece of the history that you need to understand if you really want to fully understand the Southern movement. It's not a part of this muddled gun debate that's taking place now in the country.
Well, and one theory I've heard is that people like Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, by being more extreme, gave Dr. King and the more mainstream civil rights leaders a way to, for them to seem more reasonable compared to that, and not as extreme.
I don't know. One, by the time the Panthers have emerged in full force in the late 60s, Reverend King has been assassinated.
Right.
So that's important to understand. Secondly, Malcolm did come south once. He spoke at Tuskegee Institute in Tuskegee, Alabama, and then he came over to Selma. This is in 1965. And he did say, Reverend King was in jail then, and he told a reporter that by being there, he said it let the white people know that if they didn't deal with Reverend King, they'd have to deal with him. It's hard to know how much of that is rhetoric.
Right.
I sort of, in my own thinking, separate out the rhetoric of Northern people from the practicalities of Southern struggle. It seems to me to be a different discussion. The Black Panther Party that emerged in Oakland, California, or Malcolm X, who emerges in the Nation of Islam, and there were other groups like that. They were disdainful of nonviolence, in fact. And I'm not a nonviolent person myself, but I respect people who chose that tactic and would hardly be disdainful of them.
Yeah. And so the book is more about that day-to-day reality of rural Southern life at that time.
Yes. If you're organizing in the rural South, the first thing you're going to confront, and you'll notice it if you're somebody like me, and coming from the North. And I was a minority in Mississippi as a Northerner who came down there to work.
Right.
The Mississippi movement was made up of Mississippians, and the Southern movement was made up of Southerners. So things like guns weren't really unusual to them. But it was the first thing I noticed in the household that I was staying in. I tell a story in the book about, which I won't tell here, though I may tell when I speak, about how I told the old man I was staying with that the Second Amendment gave him the right to have a gun. And I read the Second Amendment out loud to him, and he went down to the mayor's office because the mayor had confiscated his shotgun and demanded his gun back. Got it. I sort of tell that story. He got it because Mayor was a Southerner too. I think people in the North don't understand much about Southern culture.
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of learning about different cultures to go on in a lot of places, but yeah, that's one of them.
Yeah.
Well, I would love, to stay here talking most of the afternoon probably. And, we haven't even talked about any of your journalism career, including being the first African-American staff writer for the National Geographic, and working for NPR and different things like that. But maybe another time. We only have so much time to spend on the air, unfortunately. But is there anything else you want to mention before we finish up?
No, I just want your listeners to expect, if they come to where I'm speaking, that the story I will tell will be less about Martin Luther King, although I have some stories about Martin Luther King, than it is about community organizing in the South. in the rural South in particular, which is where I think the power of the Southern civil rights movement was lodged.
Yeah, that seems...
And that's what changed not just the South, but it changed the United States. I mean, you have the reason Barack Obama is president has to do with the struggle that unfolded in the South, and in the rural South in particular. And
that grassroots organizing, right?
Yeah, and it's missed because it's not as visible as protest marches, sit-ins, or Reverend King himself.
Sure. Yeah. Well, all right. So that's going to be the topic. It's called Changing America from Martin Luther King to Mississippi. We've been speaking with Charles E. Charlie Cobb Jr., who will be speaking Thursday evening, 7 o'clock in Carson Auditorium in the Student Union Building on the Adams State University campus in Alamosa. And for an hour previous to that, signing copies of his book, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible, all part of the Martin Luther King Jr. Week activities at Adams State University. Thanks so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
So we were just talking about the speech by Charles Cobb Jr. on Thursday. Also, coming up tomorrow, Wednesday, January 20th, at Adams State as part of their Martin Luther King Week activities, Dr. Ed Crowther's lecture, Whitening the Civil Rights Movement, Conservatism, the Religious Right, and the Politics of Memory, begins at noon tomorrow, Wednesday, January 20th, in Porter Hall, room 130. For more information about these lectures, you can call 719-587-7771. Listening in the background here, too, Looking for Lester, off of the David Bowie album, Black Tie, White Noise, and featuring on trumpet Lester Bowie, no relation that we know of. Some more events going on around the area. The Veterans Coalition of San Luis Valley is having a networking and information fair on Thursday, January 21st. The fair will run from 10:30 a.m. until 2 p.m. at the National Guard Armory in Alamosa. This event includes help with benefits, health care, the GI Bill, and possible work. For more information, you can call 719-379-2720. And the Sled Hockey Special Clinic is having an event Friday. All ages and abilities are welcome. Remember to dress warm for the rink. If you have protective gear, please bring it with you to the Taos Youth and Family Center. It starts at 5:15 and runs until 6:45 p.m. For more information, you can call 575-741-1135. Weather. In north central New Mexico, tonight, partly cloudy, lows 10 to 25, south winds 10 to 20 miles an hour after midnight. Wednesday, partly cloudy with a slight chance of snow showers, highs in the 30s. Southwest winds 10 to 20 miles an hour, shifting to the west 10 to 15 miles an hour in the afternoon. Wednesday night, partly cloudy, colder, lows 5 to 15. West winds 10 to 20 miles an hour, shifting to the northwest 10 to 15 miles an hour after midnight. Thursday, mostly sunny, highs in the 20s to upper 30s, north winds 10 to 15 miles an hour. Thursday night, mostly clear, colder, lows 5 below to 10 above zero. Friday, mostly sunny, not as cold, highs in the mid-30s to lower 40s. Friday night through Saturday night, partly cloudy, lows 5 to 20, highs in the upper 30s to mid-40s. And Sunday through Monday in north central New Mexico, partly cloudy with a slight chance of snow showers, highs in the upper 20s to 30s, lows 5 to 15. For the San Luis Valley, tonight, mostly cloudy, lows 3 to 12, south winds up to 10 miles an hour. Tomorrow, mostly cloudy, a 10% chance of snow in the afternoon, highs in the lower to mid-30s, southwest winds up to 10 miles an hour. Tomorrow night, mostly cloudy, lows 3 below to 4 above zero, northwest winds 10 to 15 miles an hour. Thursday, sunny, highs near 30, northwest winds around 10 miles an hour. Thursday night, mostly clear, lows 7 below to 2 above zero. Friday through Sunday, partly cloudy, highs 32 to 39, lows 4 to 14. Sunday night and Monday in the San Luis Valley, mostly cloudy, a 10% chance of snow, lows 4 to 10, highs near 30. 8:30. Thanks for being here for Hasta Las Ocho this evening. I'm Mike Clifford.